Hello and welcome to Popular Antiquarian, the podcast about a middle-aged man exploring the strange and forgotten corners of pop culture. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is the third instalment of our deep dive into the Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, a turn-of-the-millennium action fantasy series from the makers of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. In the first two episodes of Mystic Knights, we've seen the core gang of Rohan, Angus, Deidre and Ivar come together to quest for the mysterious Knight Draganta, an ancient warrior who might have the power to save the kingdom of Kells from the evil forces of Temra, led by the sorceress Queen Maeve. The quartet ventured into the magical and extremely irritating kingdom of Tir na Nog to be tested by a tiny king with an unfortunate beard, and were rewarded with a selection of magical weapons with which they were able to beat back the forces of Temra and dispatch the ogre which Queen Maeve had summoned with the help of an evil fairy with the manner of a supporting character out of Withnell and I. Episode 3 is entitled The Dragon of Dare, and it opens with a genuinely surprising scene. It's the aftermath of a battle, and we can see the ground is littered with the warriors of Kells as a column of Temra soldiers makes their way across the field. This is surprising for two reasons. The first is that a field liberally strewn with dead soldiers isn't usually the sort of thing you get in a kids' TV show. The second reason is that the production team have so far been extremely wary of allowing the extras to risk getting the brightly coloured costumes dirty. At the head of the column rides a commander who sardonically comments that the 3rd Battalion has been thorough and cautions his warriors against looting. It seems like the war is not going well for the forces of Kells, despite the presence of the Mystic Knights and their magical weapons. We get a nice close-up of one of the Temra soldiers, ignoring the interdiction against looting. He grabs a torque from a dead soldier, and as he passes on, we see the soldier's eyes flick open. The apparently dead army leaps to its feet and surprises the Temra force. We get a very brief battle scene, which is big on clashing swords and shoulder barges, but characteristically low on actual injuries. It all only takes about a minute, but I think the scene is cleverly playing with the structures of kids' TV in a fun way. Context is important, and while the sight of a field of dead warriors would be perfectly fine, maybe even a common way to open an episode of something like Game of Thrones, it is a big surprise here, and that makes the opening hit quite hard. At the same time, because the viewer likely knows the unspoken rules of kids' TV around violence, they're also primed for there to be some kind of twist, and that creates intrigue. I think even younger viewers generally grasp intuitively that there are things the media they consume won't show them, even if they aren't consciously aware of that fact. Being primed for a twist often makes the twist land better, and that's absolutely the case for me here. Once the soldiers of Kells leap to the attack, it seems completely obvious that they were only shamming. It is the perfect way to both push gently at the boundaries of what is acceptable and then reassure the viewer that this is still ultimately a safe place. It also serves as a subtle reminder that even though we never see it on screen, warriors are presumably fighting and dying in the various engagements of this war. This being Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, the entire sequence takes under 90 seconds to play out. As always, there's no time to hang around because there is always so much stuff they have to get through. From that strong opening, we cut to the court of King Conovar, who is once again trying to play kids' TV show dialogue like he's playing Macbeth at the Globe, a dedication to his craft which I find entirely admirable. He is pleased with the ambush, which was the idea of his daughter Deidre. He's very, very impressed with her tactical nous, though perhaps not as impressed as she is with her own, though she does caution that it's a stratagem that will only work once. Cahad the Druid puts a downer on things by reminding everyone that it only worked once because Maeve didn't deploy her full forces. What a killjoy. We get an awkward segue into explaining the premise of the show, that being that the Mystic Knights still need to find the warrior Draganta. Deidre says that Rohan, Ivar and Angus are even now deep in preparation for the next phase of the quest. In fact, they are not. They are doing clay pigeon shooting with their magical weapons because it's the past and people have to make their own entertainment. It's absolutely not deep preparations for the next phase of the quest, and when Deidre and Cahad rock up to see them, she isn't shy about telling them that. Once again, she gives them a good ticking off for their feckless behaviour, putting her in the position of surrogate mother to the three boys and casting Rohan and Angus's rivalry for her affections in a distinctly Oedipal light. "Are you knights or nimrods?" asks Deidre, which is a good put-down, although perhaps a bit American-flavoured, though it does feel churlish taking the show to task for the odd Americanism when they've gone to the trouble of filming in Ireland with a largely Irish cast. Rohan has a genuinely terrible idea for what they should do next: consult with the squeaky-voiced king of Tir na Nog, a plan that preemptively sets my teeth on edge as soon as he mentions it. We saw in the last episode that Tir na Nog is a weird underground dump filled with rocks and tiny people who are high all the goddamn time. I'm getting the uncomfortable feeling that we're going to be seeing Tir na Nog way more frequently than I feel happy with, but that sense of impending doom is always mitigated by knowing that each scene will only be about 45 seconds long, because Mystic Knight seemed presciently aware that a lot of ADHD goes undiagnosed until later in life. At the end of this scene, Cahad takes the opportunity to have a dig at Angus, because that's what Angus is for, kicking when you get out of bed on the wrong side and want to take it out on someone. I think I might be a bit in love with him. The knights head to the fairy ring and use the stone to transport themselves to the court of King Finvara, who smugly tells them that he's been expecting them. Somehow the knights restrain the urge to pick up the tiny monarch and drop-kick him into the nearest pit. He grudgingly tells the group that they must now seek out the magical armour created by the ancients long ago, before even the time of the little people. Each piece of armour is protected by a sentinel, and Finvara summons an image of the 4 sentinels, who do look pretty menacing in a plastic sort of way. Each sentinel must be faced alone to prove the aspirant worthy to summon the armour. The armour can only be summoned in times of great need, so you can't just call for it when you're too hungover to get dressed properly. Although, having said that, if you need to go to the shops for some crisps whilst afflicted with a terrible hangover, that would qualify as great need in my book. Rohan asks about the Dragon of Dare, which is good given that that's the title of the episode. Spoilers, the Dragon of Dare will barely appear in this episode. Finvara says they won't be able to tame Pyre, the Dragon of Dare, without their armour, and only then will they be able to hunt for the warrior Draganta. Finvara seems unfathomably pleased that the heroes will have to jump through so many hoops, and it's not clear why. Perhaps he's aware on some level that he lives in a hole in the ground surrounded by giggling imbeciles, and it's made him bitter. The knights leave Tir na Nog, but not without Aideen, the off-brand Tinkerbell, tagging along to show them a map. I think of all the core cast, she is the one who most looks like she's dying inside, and to be fair, squeaking exposition while striking a pose intended to suggest you're in flight, it's not really a plum role. The group debate where to go first, but Angus, nature's punching bag, has a much better idea, which is that they should completely ignore Finvara's instructions and go straight to the Dragon of Dare and tame it with their magical weapons. For unclear reasons, Ivar and Deidre are on board with this obviously suicidal plan. I can only assume that being teleported out of Tir na Nog has a good chance of giving you a concussion. Rohan, ever the boring one, thinks they should follow Finvara's guidance, but he's outvoted, so it's off to find Pyre the Dragon of Dare and somehow make friends with it by shooting it with fire and lightning, also known as the Leeds United away fan method of making friends. Their discussions are spied on by a bogey, a hunchbacked magical sprite who can appear out of thin air via a mechanism that involves generating a puddle of green slime. Looks like Maeve is going to get wind of what the mystical knights are up to. Taming the Dragon of Dare goes spectacularly badly, as you might expect. It does not want to be tamed, and between lashing at them with its tail and breathing fire, it proves far too great a challenge even for the group's magical weapons. The dragon has that same action figure brought to life quality that the ogre had in the first 2 episodes, and I think I quite like the design, although it does raise significant issues for interacting with the characters. It's still a fairly spectacular set piece with which to finish the first half of the episode though, and it ends when Angus narrowly avoids getting burned alive, with his trousers taking the brunt of the damage in a way that doesn't really make sense in terms of the physics, but does mean that when the Mystic Knights flee the dragon's cave, one of them isn't wearing any trousers, which turns out to be equally funny whether you're 6 or 46. "What am I going to do about my bottom?" asks Angus, which is a line that will be living rent-free in my head for the next 20 years or so. Rohan and Ivar are extremely amused at this buttock-related jocularity, as is the fairy Aideen, but once she's finished tittering, she does magic up a fresh pair of trousers for him out of a handy patch of moss that Ivar finds. Deidre doesn't find it funny because her whole job is to be a massive killjoy and remind any girls that might be watching that proper young ladies don't laugh at bottoms. It's fine for drug adult fairies, but not suitable for heirs to the kingdom of Kells. With Angus's bottom now dealt with, Rohan gets to be the boring one again and insists that from now on they'll follow Finvara's instructions to the letter. So they draw straws to decide who gets to be first. Angus, ever the chancer, secretly breaks his straw in two, which backfires on him when Rohan announces that it's the shortest straw going last, which is the opposite of the impression he was giving when the straws were first drawn. That means that Rohan goes first, Deidre is second, Ivar is third, and Angus once again is kicked in the balls by life. It seems a bit mean to toy with a man who has already lost his trousers and presumably most of his pubic hair to dragonfire, but I suppose he did technically try to cheat. I was quite down on Angus to begin with. As the show goes on, I find I am warming to him more and more. Sure, he's full of himself and probably has an even worse haircut than Rohan, but clearly he never got anything out of life that he didn't take for himself. I thought he'd be the most irritating one, but it's Rohan. Rohan is the worst one because he's a condescending plank of wood. Regardless, they head north, accompanied by Aideen. As the group walks off, a bogey pops up from a patch of slime to remind us that Queen Maeve is still a thing. The bogey also giggles to himself continually, which seems to be the only thing the writers can come up with for most of the fair folk in this setting. I'm not sure why all the various magical sprites find the mere fact of existence deeply hilarious, but it is never not grating. It's now time to cut to Maeve's castle to see how she's been getting on since her reversal of fortune in the last episode and the successful ambush of her forces at the start of this one. The commander of the force we saw at the start is apologising to Maeve, who looks at him like he's a stubborn floater in the toilet bowl of life. He claims that they fought as well as they were able. "Did you?" sneers Maeve, and hands him a sword with the words, "Show me your best." She grabs a sword from her General Torque. He hasn't been in the show much as yet, but is often found lurking at Maeve's elbow. She then proceeds to give the unfortunate commander a severe drubbing, which ends with him sprawled prone and terrified on the ground. Either Maeve is really good at sword fighting, or he doesn't feel good about stabbing the woman who pays his wages in front of his commanding officer. It is a decent bit of business, to be fair, and a good way of re-establishing Maeve as a threatening presence in the wake of a series of mild disasters. Maeve is really growing on me as a villain. I think her costume designs are a bit underwhelming, but Charlotte Bradley is making up for that with a very expressive and frequently scenery-chewing performance. With the commander dealt with, it is now the perfect time for the bogey to pop up with news of the Mystic Knights heading for the ice caves of the north. Maeve does a good job looking suitably disgusted by a creature that arrives heralded by blobs of supernatural mucus. She orders her General Torque to take a battalion to destroy the knights before they can obtain more power. Mida, the dark fairy, pops out of his magic goblet to tell her that won't be necessary. The knights will be dead before they reach the ice caves, and besides, the caves are guarded by the Ice Lord of Temra, a terrible warrior clad in skeletal armour that we saw briefly in the vision provided by Finvara earlier. I've said it before, I will doubtless say it again, but Ned Dennehy's portrayal of Mida the Dark Fairy is the highlight of any episode where he appears. His performance has it all, a wonderful oily delivery, gurning facials, and a series of absolutely bizarre mannerisms that make him completely hypnotic. I have decided that this is absolutely the show's cult gay icon, and I feel like I ought to be building a Geocities site to that effect even as we speak. His confidence seems to find favour with Maeve, and so we cut back to the knights on their journey through the beautiful Irish countryside to their next challenge. Rohan hears a distant rumbling noise, which Angus passes off as his stomach. He is, after all, very hungry. It isn't his stomach, though. It's a rock fall starting above them, which threatens to crush them all to pieces. They take cover from the deluge of falling rocks, which form a thick barrier, entombing them in a prison of darkest styrofoam. A prison that could collapse upon them at a moment's notice. It is a sticky situation and no mistake, and the group do the only sensible thing in the circumstances, which is to start bickering, which is the most relatable thing they've ever done as a group since the show began. Fortunately, Ivar has a cunning plan, which involves using Aideen's magical powers to remove one specific stone, the keystone, which will then cause the rest of the stones to fall away. "How do you know that removing this stone won't cause the rest to fall on us?" asks Rohan. "I don't," says Ivar simply, showing the kind of sang-froid that is always deeply, deeply badass. Everyone's had at least one key character moment this episode. Angus has got his bum out, Rowan's been deeply boring, Deidre's acted like a shrew, and now Ivar gets to show off his effortless cool. I think he's probably doing best out of this episode, although I continue to find Angus more relatable. Aideen uses magic to dissolve the keystone, and the knights successfully escape. Having successfully negotiated the rockfall, it's now time for Rohan to head into the ice cave alone to try for the magical armour. Once again, his progress is observed by the bogey, who pops up out of a puddle complaining about being nearly stepped on. That's an excuse for the action to shift back to Maeve's castle, and a lovely bit of business as Maeve reaches for a bowl of grapes and puts her hand in a puddle of goo occasioned by the arrival of the bogey on her dining table. Her "this is the shit I have to put up with" face is priceless. The characters are really starting to bed in at this point, and I think the actors have found the measure of the scripts and are starting to have a bit of fun with what must have been an extremely silly job. Once the bogey has delivered his report and been kicked off the table, general talk suggests that this apparent reversal of fortune presents an opportunity to attack the other mystical knights, while Rohan is indisposed, being murdered by the Ice Lord of Temra. Maeve immediately takes credit for the idea, which suggests that if the Sorceress Queen thing doesn't work out, she's got a bright future ahead of her in the comics publishing industry. This is the first time we've seen Jerry O'Brien, the actor playing Torque, really have a proper dialogue scene, and he's fabulously unctuous, full of oily flattery. I think there's going to be some mileage in him and Maeve as a double act. Every good villain needs a good second in command, and while Torque is no Starscream, I do see some potential here. Maeve uses her magical staff to summon a juggernaut from the living rock of the mountain just as Rohan steps into the cave to try and find his armour. The design of the juggernaut is really good. It's basically what you'd expect from a fiery rock monster, but at the same time there's a little hint of the dinosaur about it, with a huge, wide-moored head shaped like a kind of wedge of cheese. It looks significantly more intimidating than the ogre, that's for sure. Ivar and Deidre try their magical weapons without success, as the juggernaut shrugs off their attacks and spits boulders at them, forcing them to flee for cover. Meanwhile, Rohan has found the Ice Lord, who has a big sword and what sounds like a very sore throat. His armour design isn't anything unusual, but it's a decent rendition of your classic fantasy bones and spikes. You know, meat and potatoes, evil armour design, the sort of thing you'd expect to see in World of Warcraft on a reasonably high tier enemy. He fights Rohan on a narrow bridge spanning one of the many dark abysses that seem to litter this world. Now, connoisseurs of terrible fights generally agree that the very worst fight in all of television is the fight between Captain Kirk and the Gorn in the original Star Trek episode Arena. That fight, fatally undermined by a set of prosthetics that chronically limited the Gorn's ability to move, and indeed apparently to see, feels like it's taking place underwater. This fight scene isn't quite that bad, but it is still a masterclass in actors swinging fake swords very slowly at each other because the budget doesn't run to proper stunt performers and there isn't time to properly rehearse the moves. There's episodes of Blake 7 with better fights than this, and I do not say that lightly. This being Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, the whole showdown with the Ice Lord of Temra inevitably plays out over about 30 seconds, and equally inevitably, I love it. The fight ends with Rohan using the fire ability of his sword to cut through the rock bridge beneath the Ice Lord's feet, sending him plummeting into the depths. With that small obstacle out of the way, Rohan is able to claim his armour. With a shout of "Fire within me!" he is encased in protective layers of the very finest plastic magic can create. The look of the armour is sleek and body-fitting, and there's a face mask that has something of a ninja look to it, which I think is indicative of the producers wanting to clearly cite the visual motifs in a world that is at least Power Rangers adjacent, and I think it is a strong look, to be fair. There's clearly elements of both modern action series and medieval elements which are well married together. I guess when you're hoping to shill a successful toy line, you do need to invest a degree of thought and care into how the core cast look in their magic suits. But yeah, I think it's a really nice look. Also, given the fact that the armour almost completely obscures the face, it raises the possibility of doing some actual stunts further down the line, since it could be anyone under the plastic plating. With Rohan able to join the fight against the Juggernaut, things turn in the Mystic Knight's favour. Rohan, Ivar and Deidre combine their attacks to stun the creature, and then, in the first objectively cool attack we've seen from him, Angus slams his ball and chain to the ground to create a seismic wave that shakes the Juggernaut to pieces. It is a much better fight than the tussle with the ogre, and the Juggernaut does get a chance to show that it's an actual threat before being successfully taken down, which the ogre really didn't manage. I mean, the ogre got to be a threat to the general forces of Kells, I suppose, but he never really looked like he was going to bother the Mystic Knights themselves for more than a couple of seconds. So the day is saved and the first set of armour has been successfully obtained. There's just time to call in on Maeve's castle, where the Queen seethes at Midar, who reveals that the Ice Lord was only temporarily inconvenienced by his precipitous fall and will be available to aid Maeve against the Mystic Knights, which does mollify her a little bit and is a nice twist to finish off the episode. It's another thoroughly enjoyable 20 minutes of television for me, and it does feel like the show is starting to find its feet as an ongoing concern. Once again, I am struck by the breakneck speed of the whole show as the main attractive feature. They are able to get through so many plot points and action sequences in such a short space of time, and still find space for a few nice bits of character development. I very much enjoyed Angus losing his trousers and Maeve cheerfully saying, "I'm brilliant," as she takes credit for Torque's idea. In a world that feels increasingly hostile and dark, there is a lot to be said for an incredibly fast-paced and silly action-adventure series full of proper Irish people, and it's bursting at the seams with ideas, and one or two of them might even be good. I'm very much looking forward to seeing whether Deidre will be able to claim her own armour with the power of withering sarcasm alone. Any series that manages to tell a complete story in an episode while still giving me a reason to tune in next time is definitely doing something right in my book. So I'll be back again at some point soon with episode 4 of Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog. I'm hoping at some point it does get a bit more routine, because I'd like to be finished with the show at some point this year, but the joy of deep dives for me is absolutely not having the slightest idea whether there's going to be much actual content in the thing I'm deep diving into, and so far there's been an embarrassment of riches, as this episode that is longer than the actual episode of the show I'm reviewing indicates. It just feels like every single scene has got something I want to draw attention to, something that I found interesting. So I hope you will stick with me for as long as this stupid odyssey lasts. If you want to get in touch with me in the meantime, you can do so by email at hjdoomretrofun, all one word, @gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky. If you want to help keep this podcast on the air and ad-free, you can support me financially over at patreon.com/hjdoom. All support is deeply appreciated, and there's a whole bunch of different rewards for anyone who chooses to put their hand in their pocket to support my nonsense. If you're enjoying this podcast, why not tell a friend? If you're not, why not tell an enemy? Thank you very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.